Recording.
Hello again, everybody, to another edition of Consciousness Hour, Anthony Peake's Consciousness Hour. I always find it quite confusing when I put Anthony Peake in the front because I think it's actually everybody's Consciousness Hour. It just happens to me I'm the boring face on the front of it all. And again, I'd also like to stress, that we tend to forget that in the background is Dia Nunez, who has been such a help to me over the years, and she's been that everything works. So I'd just like to thank her again for the work she puts in, and it is incredible. She's always there on time, ready to go, which is brilliant. Right, I'm very much looking forward to today's chat. The author, James Swager, actually contacted me around about 7 or 8 months ago, wanting me to be part of an interview he was going to do, a sort of TV interview he was going to do for his TV show, Capricorn Radio, Capricorn TV. And I went along, and fantastic interview, really enjoyed it. And James is a fantastic interview, and it's self-evident from his comments. And if anybody's seen it on Facebook or on YouTube, you'll know exactly what I mean here. James really does know his stuff. And in fact, he knows more than his stuff, because I'll give you a little bit about a background to James. He's taught master's degree in engineering. He has a bachelor's degree in physics with astronomy and a master's degree in science, research and society. So clearly he very much comes from a scientific background. He's worked as an engineer, working within the oil industry as a systems analyst, across definitely Europe and possibly across the world. So here is a guy that is a very serious scientist. Not that I criticise people who aren't scientists, but effectively James has a very, very systematic way of looking at information. Now, since then, since James and I met up, I've been checking out his work, and it simply amazes me. As many of you may know, my ethnicity is Celt. And on both sides of my family, I have roots both in Ireland, Scotland, and in Wales. You can't say both, can you? Say Ireland, Scotland, and Wales. But effectively, I have roots both in Southern Ireland and Northern Ireland as well. Family roots, Northern Ireland in Antrim, and in the south of Ireland, both down to Cork and in Westmeath. So effectively, Ireland is an area that's always quite fascinated me from my own personal heritage. And I know that my sister and brother-in-law are also very keen, and they travel to Ireland quite regularly, and they're quite fascinated by the tombs that they have there, the passage tombs and the megaliths. And so it was fairly a delight to discover that my latest guest, James, his book, The Newgrange Serious Mystery, just to prove that we all have this. Oh, this is interesting, isn't it? James is obviously the right way round, whereas mine isn't. So obviously there's something wrong here with this. But this is an excellent book, and I strongly suggest that anybody gets hold of it and reads it. What I'd like to do is, James, is quickly to say hi, and then for you to introduce yourself to the listeners and the watchers as well. Sounds like something from a Marvel comic from the 1960s, or indeed a famous song by Genesis, I think, was Watcher of the Skies. So why am I going off on tangents? I have no idea. It must be Sunday afternoon. So James, let me stop talking, and you tell us a little bit about yourself, a little bit about your background, and indeed why it was that somebody with the rooted science in engineering and astronomy became so fascinated in megalithic structures.
Firstly, Anthony, great to be here. Thank you for the invite for the show. Great to follow up and come back to turn the tables this way around today. So it's a great honour to be here, Anthony. It really, really is. And, we're going to get into the end of the show and tie in some of your research as well. But, a little bit about me. Like you say, I'm an author, but it's my late-coming career. I started off in engineering. I've been through all sorts of engineering background, mostly wind farms, water treatments, power stations, that type of stuff, power generation and utilities industry. And I was a ground-up engineer. I worked up from nothing right up until a systems engineer, systems analyst, and the peak of my career. And as soon as I was at the peak of my career, I wanted out of it, because everything that I do in my entire life, Anthony, who I am and what I'm about, and my consciousness, my spiritual path is about learning. And if I don't learn, I'll fall by the wayside. That's just me in a nutshell. I've loved history and civilization since I was a kid. If I had my way, I'd have been an Egyptologist digging up Egypt. That's me. That's who I am. I love Sumerian culture, I love ancient Egypt, Mayan, stuff like that. And but that wasn't my vocation. I went into engineering, but I loved it, and I really, really loved it because I love complexity, and I love problems, and I love solutions. And I don't see myself in my career doing anything really different, although people go, oh, what are you doing here, an engineer in this megalithic field? But I have got all the skill sets that are needed to figure this problem out, and it is a major problem. But like I say, that systems analyst career that I worked up to was great for me. I mean, I would find problems in a very complex system. I worked in like heavy industrial automated systems, like plants that were 2 square kilometers wide, and computer-run electrical, mechanical systems. And the system would break down. I would plug a laptop in. I would do diagnostics. I would find out what was wrong. Sometimes, if it didn't break down, I would go in and I would out-design a problem before it happened. Incredibly unique skill set, and most people really just think is just beyond them, but everybody is a systems analyst. Your human brain is designed to be a systems analyst. That's how the human race is evolving. We look at 500,000 years ago in Essex, when we look at all the flint tools. They were designing new types of tools to cut rocks in different ways. They were just looking at the system of flint, and it doesn't matter what system you look at. You will evolve that system to a better state. You use your conscious brain to do that. And all throughout history, I've looked at everything as a system. I've looked at everything since I was a kid as a system. So to work in the energy industry as a systems analyst, I didn't see that as a unique skill set to me. That was just something that I did. And when I left that because I wanted to go into science, and I've got interest in psychology, I've got interest in the human body, and they're mild interests, but I am very well read, and you can see my book collection behind me here. But and one big system for me is quantum physics. It's the one system that we don't understand as a race. And I did well for myself in engineering. I did work 7 days a week for 9 months of the year. I would take 3 months off. I was crazy. I was like an extremophile, workaholic. But when I got into quantum physics, and this is important because I wanted to understand, the hardest subject of all, the quantum physics nature, and I did a degree in physics with astronomy, majoring in quantum physics. It was a purely academic degree. And I thought I would naively go into doing MRI scanning machines. I had a scholarship for the Kaust University in Saudi Arabia, King Abdullah's University of Science and Technology, 2 first-class honours degrees, and I had masters. And I said to myself, I'm going to go build MRI scanner machines. That's the science role for me now. And I turned it down. I met a girl, and I told her I was writing a book as well. It was a hobby to me. It was research. I had it half written. I read some of it to her. I gave it. She said, you need to follow this career and forget what you're doing. And I went, well, there's money over here. This one doesn't have any money. But, I made a very important decision in my life, and I came back home. I left Ireland 15 years ago. I've been all over the British Isles. I've worked as an engineer in northwest Scotland, down to Cornwall, England, Wales. I've been in more parts of Britain than most British people. And that's what the Irish do. They just go to England. They go get better wages. They go to work. And, I didn't care. I was away from home. I'll just go to whatever city. I've done 20 countries in Europe as well, 22 countries in Europe, and about 16 of them have been for work as well. I worked on wind turbines in Denmark, and all these megalithic territories, by the way, all these places that I was living in and working in, they're all megalithic regions, and I always fulfilled that passion as an interest to look at this stuff. It's incredibly important. I was naturally in this region for work. And it was like a playground for me to go out and research this stuff. Now, I never did it in an academic sense. I always did it I used to say I was goofing off these monuments. I would just go, look at them, look at the mystery of them, fulfill that mysterious part of my brain that I love to seek and search answers. And I never, ever thought I would be writing a book on it one day. However, when I did come back home, I had a friend that I brought to some monuments, and he asked me very pertinent questions that I didn't know the answer to. And when somebody does that to me, be sure the next time that I get answer that question, I'll answer it, because that's who I am. I Google everything, I look everything up, I look at, and I'll research it. And that's who I am. I love researching stuff. That's in my nature. And when I researched this astronomy rock art, I realised that something very particular. Now, at that time, I had just done a physics with astronomy degree. You would think that I planned on my academic career to do this role, but I didn't. It was very accidental, and I just had done a physics with astronomy degree. I grew up with Graham Hancock and Robert Bauval, Robert Schoch, John Anthony West in Egypt, and all this archaeoastronomy legacy that they've left us in the last 20 years. They've now become friends of mine from conferences and TV stuff, and that's even wonderful in itself. But I knew about the archaeoastronomy, and I had this astronomy skill set to look at this stuff now. And I just found myself in the right place at the right time to answer this question. And when I looked at this stuff, I went, whoa, hang on a minute. Rock art in Ireland? We have 75% of the rock art of the whole of Europe in Ireland, which is incredible. 45% of that rock art is in a 2-mile radius in Ireland. You know, and if you're going to look to figure a civilization, this is my systems analyst brain kicking in again. If you're going to look to figure out a civilization, you're going to have to look at the wider complexity of the problem. You're going to have to look at this may seem like common knowledge, but it's not done, and it hasn't been done in a very systematic way. You need to look at every megalithic country. You need to look at all the data. You need to look at all the rock art. You need to look at all the dolmens, all the megalithic mounds, all the stone circles. You're going to look for commonalities in design feature, and then you're going to look wider different. You're going to look for commonalities in the rock art and ones that are different. And you're going to look for individualistic styles, and then you're going to see cross-boundary relations to each other and stuff like that. And that's what my approach was. But I knew it wasn't being done, even just within Ireland on its own. And everybody flocks to Newgrange, and everybody flocks to Stonehenge, and everybody goes to Maze Howe, and everybody goes to Avebury, and they become Avebury authors and Newgrange authors and Stonehenge authors, and that's fine. We need that too. There's enough in those monuments to write a book on that. But nobody seems to be doing this wider complexity. There's pockets of it going on, but not in a systematic way. So I realised to myself, okay, we've got a lot of rock art in Ireland. Okay, it's not being done in a systems analyst approach. I said, well, let's look at all the data, see what corroborates, and then see can we find any answers. And I did, and I realised that there's a cosmology there. There's a very, very crude cosmology, but I found some of the stuff that I researched, and it's in that book, the Newgrange Serious Mystery. Some of it is other people's theories, by the way. Some of them I have tweaked, some of them I have pointed out flaws, and some of them I actually enhanced, and some of them are my own as well. So, but the idea was to show the cosmology. Now, I focused a lot on Ireland for the very first reason that I mentioned here. 75% of the rock art of the whole of Europe is in Ireland. And if you're going to figure out anything about any culture, any civilization, you've got to look at their writing system. It seems like if they wrote something down, whether that's art or whether that's words, hieroglyphs, whatever, that's what's going to tell you. I mean, that's like their brain going to their hand and leaving you a message. Yeah, it seems obvious to do that. However, that's not being done. Archaeology is a battle with the rest of the alternative theorists, and they don't embrace the astronomy. They don't embrace the acoustics knowledge that these guys left us that's embedded in the cultures as well. And they don't address anything that's an alternative theory. And it seems a shame. It really does seem a shame. However, there is some astronomy that I can't say is definite, and there's some that I can't say is definite. It's measurable, it's quantifiable, and that's the stuff that I wanted to expose in the Newgrange Serious Mystery. So hopefully that can kind of give you an idea why I got into this role. As a matter of fact, it was about 2007 when I did realise this. I actually found some rock art at the top of Ireland in Donegal, Standing Stone, and it's got 2 constellations on it, Ursa Major and Ursa Minor. And as far as I know, it's not even in the record. Chapter 7 in the book, Ardmore Rock Art. It's not even in the record as being Ursa Major, Ursa Minor in 2007. I'm like scratching my head going, looking around me. It's like, has nobody realised this? And because if you think of it statistically, Donegal is a very remote part of Ireland. Most of the population of Ireland lives in Dublin and Belfast. And then you have this incredibly remote area. The people that do get there, it's not even on the signpost. You have to look up a megalithic site to find the coordinates of this place. Even when you get there, the farmer doesn't even let you on the land. Okay, so even if you make it down that far, it's only the hardened researchers to get there. And if the hardened researchers are there, how many of them are versed in astronomy? Take that statistic away. Statistically, it's not. I'm not surprised that this stuff is still not in the record. It's not embraced. Now, what I realised about that was that we have constellations shown in rock art, and this is a big thing. I mean, if these guys are drawing constellations, well, then that goes, hello, they were doing astronomy. You can say they have solar alignments and lunar alignments and alignments to Venus, so you can say there's alignments to stars, but that's all theoretical. Well, if you've got a picture showing a constellation, well, then it's like, hang on a minute, these guys are doing astronomy. And that's what I thought was the most indicative thing. Funny enough, that was one of the first things that I researched. And I thought to myself naively, how much more is out there? So I thought I would go and look at the astronomy. And I did twig something very, very clever. I said, Ireland's very unique because we've got a high quantity of passage graves still intact. And in their passage graves, we've got a lot of rock art. Now, passage graves, for those, just to build up a picture for the audience, and I'll let you come in a second, Anthony. Passage tombs or passage graves, it's a misnomer. The name is a misnomer. They are astronomical observatories first and foremost. Inside there's acoustic effects. And then they have the ceremonial burial of the dead. They would cremate the bones outside and put them in ceremonial bowls inside, and they were very respectful to the people that had deceased. It was their way of, perhaps the people who built the monument were buried there, who knows. But the point is, archaeologists focus on the stones and the bones, and they call them passage tombs, but they make them, they're like astronomical observatories. They're like Stone Age universities, if you want to call them that. There's such a body and a system of knowledge encoded into these. But the point is, this passage tomb, it's a dome-shaped mound with a ring of curbstones and a passageway going into the internal chamber. And as of any passageway or any walkway has an alignment, and the alignment is usually to the sun, the moon, or an equinox or a solstice or something like that. And if you have an alignment, well, and you've got rock art, well, then you've got a major, major investigation procedure to pursue. Now, that may seem very obvious, but I just thought to myself, well, I mean, this seems to be the nice, it happens to be in my home backyard as well, but it seems to be the place to focus, because you go to places like Denmark, where I've seen about maybe 100 passage tombs there. They've got about 450 still in the record. They probably had about 20,000 at one point, and they've all been decimated. There's passage tombs all across the whole of Europe, maybe 60,000 in total at one point. But what's left over there, they have no rock art at all. So you've got this anonymous alignment that doesn't really have any background information. So if you got rock art to back up what you're saying, this is like a major beacon of research, and that's what I wanted to focus on. So that's why I call it passage grave cosmology. It seems like a very obvious thing when I tell it to you, but it's not being done. Like I say, even within the Irish record, I went around to every single passage grave in Ireland, every single one, looking for commonalities. Now there's 120 plus. Out of those, 50 are decimated. Out of those that's left, about 30 are in various states of decay. And some of them are in pristine condition with the roof still on them. But make no mistake, the alignment is still there. Even the ones that are down to ground level with no roof, the alignment is still there. And it's not rock art at every single one, but we've got a major part of the story. And that was my systems analyst approach, which, is still the engineering brain, still the systems analyst approach. I don't care if it's the human body, I don't care if it's psychology, even the systems within the human body. It's all a system. And if you look at any system, you will understand it. But you must look at the complete system. If you look at the complete system, you will see how it works. You'll see why it doesn't work. You'll see why it fails. And that's me. That's James Swagger, the systems analyst.
Wow. James, I could listen to you forever. I really could. I was thinking, I don't really want to butt in here at all, because that was all too fascinating for me. There were a couple of things I picked up on there. And the first one we can come back to, which is your interest in quantum physics, which hopefully if we'll have time to do that. But one of the things that intrigued me in your book was the way in which you describe the implications that whatever civilization was responsible for these buildings, or whatever the culture was, that they must have come from the West. And I thought that's quite an interesting idea. And then I agree with you totally. And if you look at the maps of Western Europe, it is clear that this civilization, or whatever it was, landed in various points along the western seaboard of Europe, and effectively went into a certain degree inland, but not a great deal. But of course, what is intriguing is the point you make that it seems that although they were a similar culture, or they were the same culture, they weren't necessarily in immediate contact. So therefore, they developed in their own way, in certain ways. Pockets, yeah, and it seemed to be that. Now, what I hadn't thought about before was your comment you just made before, that many of the sites have disappeared because of the way in which they've taken the stones and everything else, and they've taken them away. But there are two things that I'd like you to just expand upon, really. The first one is who these people could have been, And secondly, more importantly, how they managed to do what they did with seemingly no written language as such. In other words, they didn't seem to write things down. They wrote symbolically. So the first question is who they were, and the second thing is how did they carry forward their knowledge if they didn't live in a civilization that seemed to keep records in one way or another?
Sure. The big question of who they are, actually, I'm in developmental research at the moment. I could go on for a whole show about that, but my research now that I won't get into too much is that there may have been individual tribes and there may have actually been two cultures fused together. I have a lot of good reasons for that and a lot of speculation, but highly intellectual speculation why that is as well. But the point on the being coming from the West, that's the most important. I mean, if you're going to figure out who anybody is, you're going to have to look at the geographic region. And when you look at the geographic region, they're all on the western coastal seaboard of Europe. So we're talking Ireland, Scotland, Galicia, Spain, Brittany, all around that, and Portugal, all around the Mediterranean coastline as well. Malta, again, being an island, so it's there. Sardinia, Corsica, I mean, all around this western European seaboard, especially in the northwestern seaboard, southern Scandinavia, southern Norway, even up as far as northern Norway, we have standing stones. Up near the Arctic Circle, islands of Tenerife have rock art that's the exact same as Northern Ireland in a place called Seskil Green. And I tell you, nobody goes to Seskil Green because the farmer today keeps bulls in that field, and I've been personally chased by bulls. I nearly lost my life in there before. But and I knew there was linked to the rock art there, but I have photographs of it, and it's incredibly indicative, the same as Tenerife. But you must look at this stuff and say, okay, if they're on the, and I've seen this in documentaries, even in the BBC, that the archaeologists believe that they were living on the coastline because they had a fresh source of seafood. However, all the evidence points out that this is just guesswork, pure guesswork based on no fact. And my theory is that these guys were fleeing from rising sea levels. I even speculate the high Brazil content that, in Ireland, off the coast of Cork, there's a small island. And I don't think this was just coming from one island. I think this was probably one major source island. I think there's islands around the Sunken Islands around Tenerife as well. But they came from the west. We have Gaelic Irish books saying that they came from the west. But there is a sunken island known as Porcupine Bank. It's a sandbank, basically, probably about the size of London, where its peak is at about 20-mile diameter. And it's about 100 miles off the coast of Cork. If you look up Porcupine Bank on Google Images or Google Maps, you'll find it. And it's on the Rockwall Trench. Ironically enough, and I researched maps, I've done articles on maps before, I was well aware of this stuff as well, but there is ancient source maps all showing High Brazil. They think that may come from the Clan Brazil in Ireland, that actual name, the Clan Brazil, may have been like from High Brazil. But the mythological tales talk about them coming from a sunken continent out in the western seas. So we have mythological, we have geological, and we have cartography evidence. So, I mean, it's not just one source map either. There's several source maps. I've even been to Vienna in Austria to see the Globe Museum there. I knew there was a Mercator globe there from the 15th century, and it's got High Brazil on it as well. And they're all showing High Brazil the exact same physical size as the sunken sandbank of Porcupine Bank in the same location. So there's a direct match there. They scrubbed it out of the maps in the 18th century. They sent out ships from Bristol in the UK looking for High Brazil on a research expedition. And they couldn't find it. So they went, well, it's not there, so take it off the maps. And that's why we don't have it in our map record today. But make no mistake, it's there in ancient times. The Gaelic books that I'm referring to is the Book of Invasions and the Book of Leinster. And they talk about the Tuatha De Danann, and then which later became the people of the mounds. So the Tuatha De Danann, or Tua De Danann, is the proper Gaelic Irish pronunciation, became known as the Dinashee, and Dinashee is Gaelic for people of the mounds. Dinna is people, she is mounds. So the people of the mounds, these Tua De Danann were known as a mythical race of gods. However, they were known to come and land in Sligo on Leinster Mountain, and it says they even came in on a dark cloud. Some of them say they came in from the mist from the sea, from the sunken land. There's different there's several records of the same story in different books, all corroborating each other to about 90-95% accuracy. So it's not just one book saying one thing; it's actual several books. So what we have is the ancient Celtic race inheriting what the megalithic builders left us. And it's nowhere else in the record or anywhere else in megalithic Europe. They don't have any literature mentioning this. And everywhere else in Europe doesn't have the high quantity of rock art as well. So Ireland is where the answers are. That's why I'm pointing this out to you. Not because I'm Irish and I'm out to writing a book. That's where the answers happen to be. Now, I have gone around all of Europe. I've been to 450 plus passage tombs in an obsessive craze of looking for answers. And I see very, very, very similar styles in some slightly different, some slightly the same, and it's always the same type of building structure. Make no mistake, this was a civilization stroke culture, whichever you want to call it. It was unprecedented. The domain that these guys covered were from Tenerife as far as northern Norway. That's a latitude difference of 45 degrees, which is half the northern hemisphere.
And just very quickly, just so the listeners are aware, what kind of timescales are we talking about here, James? Just to put it into chronological positioning.
Sure. Good question, Anthony. I mean, from the very inception that we know about, 5,000 BC, and they seem to die out at about 1,000 BC. So we have a 4,000-year domain accepted. It could be more than that, but that's what we definitely know. And I say that Carroll Moor megalithic cemetery in Sligo, a major hotspot. There's more megaliths in Sligo probably than the rest of Ireland in terms of passage tombs and dolmens and stuff like that. There's something like 5,000 archaeological sites in the county of Sligo alone. So it's a major hotspot, just like Brittany. Brittany is a major hotspot as well. 2 natural landing bays as well. 2 natural seaports and landing bays where you would come from the Atlantic and land. You would hug the coastline looking for these places. But Brittany, 5,000 BC, 4,800 BC. Kirkcaldy megalithic passage tomb, 4,800 BC, carbon dated. And Sligo, carbon dated 5,400 BC and 4,600 BC. So pick a date range there. For approximately 5,000 BC, the earliest known sites. Even within Ireland, we have a gap then of about 1,800 years until we have places like Newgrange, Carroll Keel, and other places popping up. So the popular explosion of megalithic monuments seems to be about 3,000 BC. And then we see them petering out, dying out at about 1,000 BC. And this is where we have the Celts coming into the earliest existence about 1,500 BC to 1,000 BC. So there's a 500-year overlap there. And that's why we have them in the written record. Now, we didn't have any written records of the Celts until about the Book of Invasions, where Irish priests would write down the tales of the Tuatha De Danann and the Book of Invasions, the 5 people that conquered Ireland. And there was 5 groups. They even talk about groups coming from Spain. It's ironic that the people in Spain have the same genetic haplogroup as the people in Northern Ireland and Scotland, and they also have the same high quantity of Rh negative as well. Incredibly unusual. Rh negative people in the same haplogroup have a lot of blue eyes, green eyes, and dark hair. That's why the Scottish and the Irish have such a blue-eyed, green-eyed race of people. Like it's or that culture. Not really call it a race, but a high quantity of Rh negative. The biggest quantity of Rh negative in the world is in the Basque region. So we have the sons of Mill, one of the groups that conquered Ireland. So we even have some of the stuff matching up with genetic evidence today. And the Basque people are known to be a seafaring race as well. It's not a major stretch for these people to communicate all these different regions by boat. So there may have been some crude contact migrations between island to island. I don't think it was regular, and I don't think it was like we think today, where we go and we start from one place and we conquer like the Romans did. The Romans started in Rome and they spread out like an infection or a virus and then just engulfed everything that was in their path. They incorporated in local mythology and religion. The Celts and the megalithic people weren't like that. What you see is perhaps, quote, boats arriving, refugees by boats that I could talk about. Perhaps they were setting up pockets. But they knew their place on the globe from their megalithic astronomy. They knew where they were at in terms of latitude at the very least, and probably longitude as well. And I reckon they knew within roughly an approximate region where the other civilizations or the other parts of that culture was. Great example of that is, and I'll back it up with astronomy, is that in Northern Ireland, in the northeast and the northwest of Ireland, there's a special type of megalithic tomb called a court tomb. It exists nowhere else in the whole of the megalithic civilization. I don't even know anybody that talks about this other than me. They don't seem to realise what a court tomb is. A court tomb is basically like a long barrow that you find in England, or a long passageway with side chambers, probably 5 or 7, and it's got a circle, a semicircle on the very front of the tomb. So it's like a mixture of a passage tomb and a stone circle bolted onto the front of it. It only occurs in the northeast and northwest as well, except for 3 rogue examples in the south. There's something like 300 of these in Ireland, and they're mostly in the top half of the country. However, it's at that latitude that we find the Ursa Major and the Ursa Minor constellation, which is in the north part of the sky. And these court tombs are all facing almost due north. They're always aligned to due north. And when you align something to due north, you're looking at the pole star. And if you're looking at the pole star, well, then you know that the Earth's revolving around the pole star. And if you know that, well, then latitude's not a problem to you. Longitude's a different scenario. But you also understand that longitude wasn't cracked until 1820 by the British, when they set down the princely sum of £20,000 to crack longitude, because they were crashing ships into coastline and the pirates were having a field day. And it wasn't until the greatest minds sat down, I'm talking the greatest minds that we had in the 18th century, that the British sit down and they had to pay up to £20,000 because somebody did crack it. And they had this, because the pendulum clock won't work on a ship, so you have to create a clock that wouldn't lose time. And if you have the measurement of time, well, then you can use your speed equals distance by time formula. And if you have accurate tables, you can calculate your position on the globe. However, how did the ancients do longitude? I think they had a different, and I've looked into this. There's a device known as a tanawa, and basically it's like a pendulum that measures your angle to the moon. And if you can see the moon, and you know where the moon is on its moon cycle, now don't forget that the megalithic buildings, this is only speculation, but it's my answer for figuring out longitude. But there is a device known as a tanawa. We have drawings of this, and that they most likely measured the angle to the moon. And if you could measure your angle to the moon, and the position of the moon in its cycle, well, then you were measuring time. The time, your clock wasn't seconds or minutes or hours. Your clock was an 18.6-year clock, a lunar clock. And if you knew the lunar clock, you would know position. The problem with that is you need to be able to see the moon. If you've got cloud cover and you can't see the moon, that's going to be a problem. But eventually you will see the moon. And if you know where that moon's going to be in its 18.6-year cycle, well, then you know your longitude. It's a very, very crude way of doing it. But we know from notes in County Meath that these guys were obsessed with lunar calculations. Take notes, for example. The eastern, it's said to have an eastern alignment and a western alignment. And I call notes a lunar temple. And the eastern side measures the synodic lunar month. I have to get it right. One side measures the synodic lunar month, and the other one measures the sidereal lunar month. Now, this is an astronomical difference of about 2 days. It really doesn't matter which one you call it. They're both right. One is in an actual lunar month, and one is in an apparent lunar month, because the moon comes around the Earth in its rotation during the month. However, we're also revolving as well. So by the time it gets back around to the start, the Earth has moved a little bit as well. So for it to line up again, you have to measure the actual lunar month plus the little bit that we moved as well. So that's why we have one at 27.3 days and one at 29.5 days. So we use the apparent lunar month, this 29.5 days, but it's actually 27.3 because that's a sidereal. Same as a solar year, we have an actual solar year, synodic and a sidereal. Same as a synodic and a sidereal of Venus, everything. It doesn't matter what's moving out there. One's an apparent one because we're moving around. You have to add on the little bit of movement that we do as well. But these guys measured both of them, and it's encoded in the North Lunar Temple, and that's why I talk about it. You can say it's exactly 3 synodic lunar months to the alignments, and they wrote it on the eastern side and put it on the western side. But still today, archaeologists and other researchers look at this and go, oh, it was an equinox alignment, and it was on the sunrise, and it was an equinox sunset on the western side. But they're not exactly due east and they're not exactly due west, and they're out by a few degrees, and they think that they were dummies and they got this alignment wrong. Well, they were just tying in. This is the clever thing as well. They tied in the solar observations that they did with other things. They built upon their cosmology. The solar, let me just state the solar cycle. Everybody focuses on Newgrange and Gavrelis and all these other, and Stonehenge for that matter too, the alignments in summer solstice, winter solstice. This is a spectacle, yes, but it's not the most evolved thing that these guys did. This was just nonsense to these guys. This was just trivial everyday chores. Get the solar alignment. Once you have the solar alignment, you can then use that to do something. Yeah. When you look at the sun rise in the east, it sets in the west. That's the given. Everybody knows that. That's basic, no matter where you are, though. But in the north, the further north in the hemisphere you get, it rises in the northeast in the summertime and sets in the northwest in the summertime, in solstice, June 21st. And in the wintertime, it rises in the southeast and sets in the southwest in dead winter at 21st of December. So what we have is that solar wheel. We have northeast, northwest, southeast, southwest, and due east and due west, and then north and south. So you have an 8-segmented wheel with 8 cardinal points. You have the north, south, east, west axis, and you have the northeast, northwest, southeast, southwest. So we have an 8-segmented wheel, and they drew this for us. It's all over, like County Meath. Like you have this. We even have it in Malta as well. I know you've been to Malta as well, and I've seen it in the rock art in Scotland as well. This 8-segmented wheel. They were able to measure the solar wheel, but this was just definite days that they could do astronomy. If you're going to do astronomy and look at the stars, because the stars move over a much crazier cycles than the sun and the moon, and there's a wobble in the earth, and there's a 26,000-year cycle. There's the lunar cycles of 18.6 years. And if you're going to start building or figuring anything out, you need to do the astronomy on the same day. You need to just do your observations all on the same day, because you have summer constellations, you've got winter constellations, and then you have the long cycle of precession. If everything's revolving and moving around out there, well, there's pointless doing it on different days of the year. And this is observational cosmology. This is using the naked eye to observe the stars. You use the Earth as the optical telescope. You just stand on the Earth and you observe and you look at for patterns and cycles. And they did that, and they used the solar cycle for that. Once you have that solar cycle figured out, you can use it for something. And what we find is that these court tombs in the north of Ireland are facing due north. Now, that rules out the sun and the moon. That only leaves the North Star. And I did this for the Cassiopeia constellation as well. When you go to Carol Keel, there's 5 passage tombs, each aligned to the setting star of the Cassiopeia constellation. It's like to have 1 or 2, that'd be okay, but to have 5 stars to within a degree of accuracy, all setting, as that constellation goes down, that tells you they were tracking the Cassiopeia constellation at the very least, and most likely tracking precession. If they knew that Cassiopeia all set at those stars at that time. And Carol Keel, by the way, is carbon dated to 3500 BC, exactly when Cassiopeia was there, aligned to that. So you have to open your brain, and you have to be a little bit knowledgeable in astronomy. You don't have to be the most greatest genius in astronomy, but you just need to look at a few basic astronomical concepts and realize just a few basic things, and you can put this whole puzzle together. So we have them doing incredibly complex moon calculations, solar calculations, and tracking stars, constellations, and figuring things out. Knowing which way was due north, I mean, think about it. We're blinded by the skies today. We don't even look up anymore, especially in London. I go to London because I'm in the north of Ireland, and I see the stars every night, and I just think it's the most beautiful place in the world. I go to London, I miss the stars because I can't see them. I'll see the moon if I'm lucky, and I'll see maybe Jupiter, or see a couple of bright peaks, but I'm dumbed by the lights. Nobody looks up anymore. You know, in the ancient times, they had nothing but to look up. And when they're seeing stuff, they watched patterns. They knew the stars because they couldn't miss them, you know. And if you watch the stars long enough, you'll see patterns. You'll see summer constellations and winter constellations, you know, and you'll build that picture up slowly over time. But you start aligning, here's the thing, you start aligning a row of standing stones, like we have riddled in Northern Ireland and Dartmoor in Devon and Cornwall. We have rows and rows of standing stones. Well, those standing stones align on a star. Give it 72 years, that's going to be off 1 degree. And then it's going to be off another degree every 72 years. And eventually, after about 200 years, it's going to be off 3 degrees. And 3 degrees, by the way, is about the width of the full moon. So that'll just give you an idea. So that row of standing stones 200 years later is out of alignment. You're going to need a new row of standing stones built. So even within a 200-year cycle, precession of the equinox has knocked out these alignments, just even within their own civilization, after 200 years with nothing out of a 4,000-year building program. So it may be why they kept recycling these monuments and kept building new complexes. But to figure out precession, people think, well, how could they know about a 26,000-year cycle? Well, they don't have to know about a 26,000-year cycle. They just know there's something that's happening. They don't call it precession. They just know that there's an event out there, and it's knocking everything out of alignment, and you can witness it within a 200-year period.
Interesting point that, in that if the civilization existed, and self-evidently it did, maybe a series of civilizations that carried the information forward. But in order to carry that knowledge forward from generation to generation, you would have had to have needed some form of communication, because it is very esoteric knowledge. It is very much knowledge that's built upon many, many years of observations, clearly, to actually understand astronomy. Because when I was a kid, I was fascinated by astronomy and used to spend hours with my little telescope freezing cold outside and things, rather similar to yourself, I would guess. And one of the things that you notice when you look through particularly a reasonably powerful reflector telescope is that as soon as you actually zoom in on anything, it moves. You can actually see the star moving across your field of vision. Now, the question is then, how do you think they carried forward this knowledge? Because was it just by word of mouth, so therefore it was just told round the fires at night, and the shaman, the learned man, would explain why they built the buildings the way they did, or the tombs the way they did? Or was there something more? Because sometimes I think along the lines of, if somebody 200 years ago came across a DVD or a CD-ROM, effectively they would think it as to be some kind of a mirror, and it might symbolize something in some way to our civilization. Did our civilization have this preoccupation with pieces of circular reflective something, plastic? And self-evidently, because our technology the technology at that time would not be able to even begin to understand exactly how information could be drawn out of that particular object. Maybe, this is, I know, supposition, and people will say that's bad science, it's not anything. But it could be the reason why these civilizations did what they did was because we don't even can begin to understand exactly how they communicated with each other. Because communicate they certainly did, didn't they?
Very good point, Anthony. How did they transmit the knowledge? Well, you said two key words there, which was shamans and fire. Don't forget, these passage tombs is the burial places. Like we have churches and cathedrals for the burials of saints today. We go in and use that for a place of worship. People use it in the ceremonial sense, but they don't forget there are people buried there. Do we go around and call these graveyards? No, we call them churches and cathedrals. But because there's a burial function associated with these passage tombs, people call them passage tombs. And like I pointed out earlier, it's a major misnomer. But these were ceremonial places throughout the whole year. They were teaching platforms. Imagine people walking around the curbstones of Newgrange and Note, pointing out all the rock art, of which I'm only concentrating on the astronomy today. There's a lot of acoustics, consciousness rock art that I'll get into, Anthony. There's two types. 50% of the rock art isn't astronomy. It's weird, what we call entoptic phenomena, showing what people see going into altered states of consciousness, spirals, chevrons, floating circles, semicircles, check patterns. There's a whole list of 40 images that you can see, iconic symbols and imagery called entoptic phenomena, and they're all at Newgrange. They're all there. So in that respect, I think they were walking around these monuments and pointing them out, pointing at the rock art, going, this symbol you'll see this is one of the symbols you'll see in going into an altered state. This is a piece of constellation. This is a rock art. This is an alignment. You'll see this at this point of the year. These were established universities, and they were shamans. You make no mistake that there was a ritual function going on here to a very high level in many areas of science, not just saying goodbye to the dead, cremating them outside, and bringing them in, the burnt bones, and putting them in a ceremonial bowl. Some of these ceremonial bowls, by the way, weigh a ton, and they were actually put in first because you can't even get the ceremonial bowl out the chamber, out the passageway. They actually built the monument around the ceremonial bowl. We know this from Dow's passage tomb. The chamber, the passageway is tiny. You just couldn't get this bowl out of it. That tells you the mindset of the people, that this was the primary function. Put this bowl in first. Everything's built around this. The beam of sunlight comes in. What a way to have a ceremony and say goodbye to somebody that you lived and worked with. To have a beam of light come in, and they believed that they were taking their souls away, that they were going to the stars or whatever. That may be something that archaeology doesn't want to talk about. That's fine. make no mistake, is there. But I think they were perhaps even conceived there. I think they worked there. And I think they died there. I think it was the start, middle, and end story. I think there's people talking about fertility rights. I mean, there's a whole barrage of research going on. There's the use of quartz, and quartz may enhance fertility. Certainly the quantities of quartz that they had. Electromagnetic light comes in and hits quartz. When it hits any type of quartz, this is a scientific principle. It will be shifted into the magnetic spectrum. Electromagnetic light is two waves, electric wave and a magnetic wave. And they're both 90 degrees from each other. And they're both two sine waves. One goes up and down, and one goes left and right. And put the two together, you get an electromagnetic wave. Well, the electromagnetic wave gets shifted more into the magnetic spectrum, and when it gets shifted into the magnetic spectrum, it will enhance fertility. This is a proven, known scientific fact. Did they know that? I'm not so sure. But they may have known that in 3113 BC, when there's a major sunspot cycle event affecting fertility, which is what the Mayans started their astronomical calendar on, 3113 BC. They weren't even around then. But there was a magnetic problem on our planet affecting fertility line. There's great research into that. So the use of quartz at these sites, and I think is a fertility, perhaps maybe they're conceived there, who knows. But these monuments were used all the way throughout the year. The summer solstice, the winter solstice, the spring and autumn equinox, and the halfway points in between, the exact halfway points in between. There's a lot of alignments to those as well, these 8 points of the year. And then you would have had astronomical events happening. I mean, these were teaching platforms, and they were constantly used throughout the year. Although there was maybe one main event, there would have been a teaching platform there. Now, don't forget, when you have a fire to cremate a body, that's incredible. You need to chop down half a forest to cremate a body. I mean, that would have been a massive, massive fire that would have been seen from miles away. And don't forget, you can even see, when you stand on some of these places, you stand on a passage tomb on top of a hill, you'll see it in the next hill. I mean, if they'd seen a funeral pyre, they would have known that something has happened, and so there would have been a ceremonial, cultural gathering, and at that cultural gathering, there could have been all sorts of ritual stuff going on. So I think that will kind of give you a description, just from a basic concept, that the flow of knowledge and a cultural aspect. But most likely, they encountered this rock art to explain the cutting areas of research that they were into, which was astronomy and consciousness exploration. Now, I want to bring in Malta. I know you've been there, Anthony. Malta is just a fascinating place. I know you've had an awesome time there. There's a place called the Hypogeum. And still today, the archaeologists in Malta don't even accept that the Hypogeum or any of the temples on Malta are to do, or anything associated with, the rest of megalithic Europe. With the megalithic Europe, I mean Stonehenge, Newgrange, Maze Howe, Brittany, and all that type of stuff. And they believe Sicilian farmers came over. Why they didn't build the stuff in Sicily, the Sicilian farmers, I don't know. But the reason they think that is because there's red ochre found in Malta, and there's no source of red ochre anywhere in the whole of Malta. So they had to have got it from an export from somewhere. So they come up with this idea that Sicilian farmers came over and built the megalithic temples. And they have typecast themselves into this role, and they truly believe it, and there's no changing it. They're just ignoring blatant evidence in front of them. There's a ceremonial bowl in a place in Wicklow in Baltinglass. It's a passage tomb, and it's a triangular bowl, weighs about a ton. It's where they would have cremated the dead and brought them inside to ceremonial offer in one of these bowls. It's a tri-cornered depression of a concave bowl. It's exactly the same as one of the ones in Tarjan Temple. If you I have a picture of the two of them side by side, you couldn't tell them apart. It's the exact same ceremonial bowl. You've got the spirals. You've got the same, they don't call them recesses, they call them apses, okay, for some reason. They have a different name they call them temples, we call them passage tombs. It's the same type of monument, the same building, the same curvature, the same building techniques. And the same solstice alignments, everything is just coming in, and it's all doing the exact same thing. And it's mind-numbing that these guys are still disassociating Malta with the rest of Europe. But there's a lot of pride and ego in Malta. And that Malta has got a rich, don't get me wrong, I can see why. They have a seriously rich heritage, just like Ireland. But they've had the Phoenicians there, the Romans, the Tunisians. Everybody's been in Malta at some point in time. And they're just so proud of their heritage for all of it. And I just don't want anybody taking it from them. And it seems to be a major problem that they need to get over as a hurdle. They would have much more tourism if they did. But They even have a picture of Newgrange there at the Niger Temple complex when you go into the visitor centre, just to appease the public, because there's a lot of interest there. And people say, oh, this is just like Newgrange. And so they just put a picture up there and they don't say anything about it. They just leave it there as suggestion. And that's the best you're going to get out of them. But make no mistake that the hypogeum is by far one of the most indicative parts of this megalithic culture with respect to consciousness and spirituality, or the ritual function that these were doing, because they didn't take these temples above ground. Malta is a very small island. There's something like 28 temples there between dolmens and temples. And out of all of them, there's no cremated or burnt remains found. And so that's why they're not called passage tombs. The tomb function was in the hypogeum. They had a special place for the ceremony of the dead. Yes, they still celebrated the temple up there, but they had a special place. Now, the hypogeum is a megalithic underground complex. It's a 3-story cave system. And it's got hexagonal entropic phenomena on the ceiling. It's got an acoustic oracle hole. It's just basically this little niche in the wall. And when you or chant into this, it's like something you would put a statue in, Anthony. If you had a curve in the wall, or a little place you would put a statue in, that's what it looks like. But when you speak into it, or your sound wave goes into the curved niche and it comes back at you, and it goes around the whole cave plans, and it resonates only at the male vocal range. It doesn't resonate at the female vocal range, although myself and my other half did a little test there, and it did do it in another part of the complex. But it's only at the male vocal range that this happens. And as a result, all the side chambers and everything down there don't have doorways going into them. They have these oval-shaped holes going into another room. And it's just like a bass box. And a sound hole on a guitar will give you this bass box effect. And as a result, the 3-story cave system resonates so much so that the infrasound hits you in the chest and it affects your brainwaves. If you did it long enough, and I did this at acoustic testing in passage graves, it will affect your consciousness. These guys may have had psychedelics, entheogens. They may have did it with acoustics. There's the sound people in the rock art, and we know that from down in South Africa, they use rhythmic dance to go to all stages of consciousness. It doesn't matter what your root is in, but make no mistake that they left us this consciousness, what I call consciousness rock art. And this is going back deep into antiquity. You can go and check this stuff out in Paleolithic rock art in the Ardennes region in France. It's all over there, Peshmerga, Lascaux, and stuff like that. So we have this deep antiquity of conscious rock art. We even have the Pleiades drawn there. I don't know how far back this stuff goes. I mentioned that in my next book, The Megalithic Acoustics Mystery. But these teaching platforms was a system of exploration of consciousness, exploration of the stars and astronomy. It was just like a university. It had different branches, but it was like a system of knowledge. And each of these systems of knowledge have definite lines of inquiry. Make no mistake, there is plenty of stuff still to be discovered. And the hypogeum holds the key to all this, Anthony. The hypogeum had 5,000 remains buried in the deep pit of it. They probably ritually used this place for 1,000 years. And they went in to say goodbye to their dead, going into an altered state of consciousness by resonating and chanting and umming in there. Don't forget, this place is in the dark. How did they even carve this place without, some form of light? They weren't even supposed to have metal. They did it with antler picks. I mean, it's one of the most eeriest, strangest, bizarre, awesome technical achievements. It's everything. It's got everything. I mean, it's just begging to be explored. They only let 10 people in per hour, and they let 8 people, I think, to 6 or 7 sessions a day. And that's it. And you have to book this place 6 weeks in advance. They're trying to control the outgrowth of algae down there and moss down there because it's a damp environment. And it was only discovered in the 19th century. However, the hypogeum, they took these skulls out, and I'll wrap it up with this. They took these skulls out, and what's so different about the skulls is that they had a different shape to them. Now, they're not like the elongated skulls of Peru, but they're not far off it. They have no sagittal suture. They may have actually been a separate tribe or a different group of people. At the very least, that's what they are. At the very least, just by their own shape. But they were all showing signs of, some sort of a strange skull shape. So they may have been their own tribe that were there, but they were exploring their consciousness. They have a definite system of acoustics knowledge. I tell you that for nothing. If you even look at the Tarjan temples and Niger temples, you will see some of the blocks are so tightly fitting together, but they're not. They curve the walls. They're like a parabolic recess. You won't see that because the roofs are missing, but if you look up the wall, they seem to have this parabolic effect, which will enhance the acoustics. Down inside the hypogeum, they didn't cut straight walls. They basically carved solid bedrock. And when they carved solid bedrock, they put in what looks like lintels and doorways, but it's all one piece of rock. They made it look like standing stones with lintels, but it's one piece of solid rock. And the walls are slightly curved as well to enhance the acoustics. And then they didn't carve doorways in. Even the archaeologists, they said, well, the ground level was probably up higher, and that's why they didn't have to build a doorway, because the ground level was up to the edge of the window, and that's where you could just walk into the rooms. And it just makes no sense, because they actually have steps and doorways down at low level. That theory is just blown out of the water. Nobody challenges them there because they have a tight rail on this monument. I mean, very people go in and get out of it. I mean, you can't get private access to it. No researchers get in or out. These skulls aren't even on display. They're kept in the basement away from public eye. But the hypogeum, I mean, if you're going to study anything about the megalithic civilization, look at the stones, look at the bones. But nobody's getting to look at these bones. Most of them are being cremated in Europe, but the ones that are in Malta are kept in a museum. So look at the bones of this civilization, okay? Make your decision based on that, yeah? But, I mean, that's not being done because they're being kept from us. And the ones that have been cremated, obviously, are being crushed and cremated and left in ceremonial bowls. But there is evidence left there to at least tie other parts of the civilization together. And there is different evidence in each geographic region, but there is also commonalities there that are begging to be explained.
All I can say again is, wow, I just didn't want to come in there because everything you were saying there was absolutely fascinating. Unfortunately, we didn't get to the hypogeum because of the fact that you had to book in advance. I will be going back specifically to go to that location because it intrigued me. Because, as you know,
Let me know when you're going, Anthony. We'll do a road trip if you like.
Yeah, that would be really good. No, definitely. In my book, The Infinite Minefield, I'm particularly interested in entheogens and how they've been applied in certain civilizations. And, you know, I'd never... Oh, thank you. Thanks, James. Good plug. And one of the things that has long intrigued me is the way of hypnagogic and hypnopompic imagery, and particularly that imagery, the liminal states before you lose consciousness, before you wake up and go to sleep. And in fact, I noticed that when I was in the Archaeological Museum in Valletta. I was particularly intrigued with the spirals that they use. Mm-hmm. And also, unfortunately, we're going to run out of time now, which is really sad. So we need to get you back on this because you've only just scratched the surface here. I mean, I was particularly fascinated by the tracks, the Clapham Junction tracks that they actually have in Malta as well, where they have these rocks.
They go into the sea, Anthony. They even go into the sea.
Which is weird. It's almost like their own version of the Nazca Plain. You know, it's very, very, very fascinating. Also, I was reminded, one of the things in your book you mentioned this about the Chaco Canyon civilization and the spirals there, because I was actually in that area in northern Arizona, southern Utah, around about 4 years ago, and it absolutely intrigued me there, the symbolism there as well. There is just so much to talk about. We haven't even touched, really. You touched upon the acoustics, but not to the extent we need to, because we're both associates and friends of Gary Evans. And I remember Gary telling me about the acoustics, particularly in some of the temples in Egypt, and the way in which the acoustics work there. Also, a previous guest, well, there's two previous guests of ours that have actually been involved in this. Patricia Awan, I always pronounce that wrong. I know, again, she's somebody you know. And also Serena Roney-Dougal, both of whom discussed unusual states of consciousness that they experience or have experienced within the tomb complexes in Egypt. So clearly there is something here that is of profound importance, and I really didn't want to stop you there because everything you were discussing there was just absolutely fascinating, Because we've only got a few minutes left, James, I know that a lot of the listeners out there, some of them will know of your work, some of them won't. Could you tell them a little bit about what you do? I mean, I was particularly interested to know that you're doing 2 events in the next few months, where you're doing the ancient sites of Ireland, and you're also doing the Anunnaki realms of the Maya tour as well. Can you tell the guys a little bit about this? Because I'm sure an awful lot of people, after listening to what you're talking about there, and you're just great at getting information across. You're like me, you're a kind of information junkie, and your enthusiasm just flows away. It's brilliant. It's absolutely brilliant. So if you can tell some of the guys how they can contact you, everything else, and the kind of tours you do and everything else, please do, fire away.
Sure. Yeah, the information, I can't stop it sometimes. I'm waiting for it to stop itself. But, yeah, I can thank you for that. JamesSwagger.com for everything I do. You'll catch my tours there. I do a lot of private tours as well, Anthony, and they're kind of taking up a lot of my time. But I have a big Irish tour coming up in June. You'll catch that there. I'm talking about some megalithic stuff in Mexico. That's the Anunnaki realm of the Maya Yucatan Equinoctial Symposium. And that's going to finish on the equinoctial event where the sun lines up the pyramid and comes down on the serpent. You catch that all again at jamesswagger.com. You'll find the links there. Yeah, I just wanted to mention though, Anthony, and just it's pertinent. I'll go quickly. There is rock art with a zigzag wavy line. It's like a sine wave almost. And picture this, Anthony. Let's say you had incense burning inside these chambers while there was a ritual function going on. You would see a standing wave. If you had an acoustic effect happening, you would see a standing wave, and it would show up physically in the air. You would be able to see it as a zigzag standing wave like that. And we have actually evidence of this in churches today, because there's acoustic effects with the recesses, because all churches are in the shape of the cross. So you have these recesses at the top of the left-hand and right-hand side of the altar. And when the church choir sings and there's incense burning, you will see zigzags waves. If you look in the air and smoke particles. So this may be why they were actually aware. There was a physical representation of why they were aware of acoustics and sine wave art, just these zigzag. And we have many references of this in Fornox and all across megalithic Ireland. But just wanted to add that in as well, because there is an actual physical reason why they may have been aware of acoustics. And I like to give that a practical example as well. But yeah, if people want to check out what I do, jamesswagger.com, you catch me on YouTube, Capricorn Radio and Capricorn TV. And I have like-minded authors like yourself, Anthony, on the show. And I'm developing Capricorn TV at the moment as well. I'm 38 episodes in there with stuff, and I've got all sorts of conferences I go to. I've got a big one coming up, by the way. Egypt's a major area of research for me. I've got a big one coming up in August, and there's a new advancement for discovery in the Great Pyramid, where they had a use of iron in 2500 BC at the very least. And there's 2 Germans involved with that, and I've got a documentary interview on that on Capricorn TV. But again, you'll find it all on YouTube or Google or whatever. You'll just find it. Yeah, jamesswagger.com links everything up anyway.
Thank you very much, James. That was absolutely terrific. We will have you back as another guest. And as I say, I think I could just listen to you for hours. Really do. Right, okay, folks. That's all for this week, for this month. Our next guest will be Mark Booth, the author. And he is famous as Jonathan Black, the author of The Secret History of the World, which was a huge international bestseller a few years ago. I've been a long admirer of Jonathan's work, and I'm really looking forward to having a chat with him. And I suspect that there will be an awful lot of the issues that James has talked about today that will be very much themed in Mark and I's discussion. We'll be recording that on the 17th of May. And we'll push it on from there. We've got lots of new guests coming on board as well. I've recently negotiated. We have Irvin Laszlo joining us in December this year as well, and 1 or 2 other guests. We've got Daryl Trefford, the guy who was the technical expert behind the movie Rain Man and was one of the world's leading authorities on Savant syndrome. Lots of people coming up, so there's lots more to look forward to on the show. And again, thanks to Dia in the background, and again, thanks for my special guest, James Swagger. Thanks, James. Thanks, and bye-bye, everybody.
Thank
See
you
you in a month's time.